questions. Who is my community? What is my responsibility to that community? How do I advocate for my community? And in what ways can I engage and mobilize my community? These are important questions that everyone needs to ask when thinking about reimagining their community, especially when you're thinking about a position of support. That's one of the reasons why I intersect. That's one of the reasons why I really value the work of Black non-believers and what Mandisa and Ro and all of you are doing, because you're creating a space and a community for those that have identified as humanists or as non-religious, and those that are questioning their religious identity and without judgment. And so there was a program that I watched Mandisa was on a couple of weeks ago, and she talked about how people still embrace the Black church, you know, because it's culturally that community. And so it's about reimagining why people associate with communities in some ways too. And I don't say that people should associate with a community that causes harm to them. Your human dignity matters more than anything. But that's something that you have to deal with for yourself and say how much you're willing to tolerate. So for me, it was looking at the moral injury of religion. Like in my life, what I experienced, even once I went from Pentecostal to Baptist, there was this moment when I went back to my home church to preach. And I remember having this moment of realizing, because someone said something to me, that I wasn't Christian enough. Like being Baptist wasn't even Christian enough for them. Or asking the questions, or people wondering like, what is your religion? Like always wanting to know, or always assuming that I am Christian, or that, you know, because I'm a part of many different groups, like that this is a particular identity that I, you know, say I am. And they're all a part of my foundation, and I don't reject any of them because all of them shape me to be who I am. But also the moral injury of religion came from my interfaith community, when some people were like, Black Lives Matter? Like, why? And so I had to look at that more deeply. So that led me to some of my doctoral research, and I'll try to go through these slides quickly because I'm trying to also be mindful of the time. Is that, you know, I had to like re-examine some things. Although I had reimagined my community, like for me, I had to look at the ministry context that I was a part of, was interfaith leadership. Like it was just like, okay, what are you saying? I realized that in that space that people valued the golden rule, and then I valued also moral imagination. That means holding people in care without exception. And I learned that from Dr. Nate Walker, who wrote this book about cultivating empathy. It's a really good book. And, you know, he and I had to go through our own journey of reimagining. But I also had to look at the problem that kept coming up in these interfaith spaces. And that was systemic racism and this notion of spiritual freedom versus human dignity. So in my research, I also had to look at, who are we as a country? Like, we're a diverse nation. We're not founded as a Christian nation, and people need to realize that the founding framers never intended for this to be a Christian nation. It was to value diversity, and so there's a lot of religious diversity. There's a rise in the religious nuns in the United States, and people need to recognize that. People need to recognize that although someone may identify as Christian, that their other identities may play a different role and they're being a part of that community. And as you can see here, this is an infographic from the Public Religion Research from 2016, from 2013, but also 2016, there was just like very slightly a shift, and even now, but the religious nuns continue to grow, as you know this as a particular group. What the religious landscape in America in 2016 looks like, and it continues to image this, is that, again, a larger population of individuals identify as unaffiliated. And one of the things that I value about like education and being in the space that I am in now is that I can't remember what organization hosted this program a couple months ago, but even how they reimagine, like when we're talking about the nuns, we need to be very specific. like just because someone is unaffiliated doesn't mean that they're secular humanist or atheist or a free thinker. It's like, you know, that person, we need to give space for that person to self-identify. And so what you see is there's a change in the religious landscape. What the media wants you to believe is that there is this huge influx of Muslims coming into the country and that they're taking over. And that's not the truth. The reality of it is there's still a small percentage of those that identify religiously in America. And you see the same thing for Jewish and also for Buddhists, but it's we have to recognize like there is religious diversity in the United States, and it's only going to continue to grow. White evangelicals are shrinking, and so people are leaving their congregations for many different reasons. Probably some of the reasons why I left mine, but so it's important to recognize that. For me, it was about going back to, as Rose said, I say human dignity is my religion, right? It was recognizing the problem. And for me, what I saw is that many interfaith leaders have had the tendency to overlook racism and minimize the social beliefs that threaten the plight of racial minorities in America. And so this was often ignored because they found the need to address spiritual freedom over human dignity. And so for me, it comes down to that if you do this, if you say you're an inclusive community, but you're exclusive and you have this blind spot about issues that impact everyone and all of their identities, then you're really hypocrites of the mission that you proclaim. And so I really did this doctoral work around this. And so these are some of the facts that I looked at, and like for the brevity of time, it's just and these are just some points in history. When you have to look at the timeline of events that happened that impacted not just African Americans, but actually Asiatic Turks and people who identify as Japanese in America. And so there's so many pieces of legislation that have like impacted the lives and the livelihoods of people, no matter what their religious identity was. Because it started back in 1787 when the founding framers sat in a room in Philadelphia and thought it was okay to overlook slavery, although there is one controversial person in history, Governor Morris, who was one of the 55 delegates, who was the only one who spoke out against the horrors of slavery. But they rejected him, of course, because most of them were slave owners, right? And so what does it mean when you have the founding of this country that starts off with the exclusion of people, the exclusion of women, the exclusion of poor people, the exclusion of Blacks, the exclusion of indigenous people, and then you shape policies to continue to reflect that? How do you reimagine community? If we examine the social beliefs of these interfaith leaders on the topic of race and human dignity, and if we help educate them about some things as it pertains to the legal construction of race and implications for religious minorities in America, and then if we engage them in diverse theological, political, and social and racial people from different backgrounds with different stories, then hopefully that will equip them to better address modeling compassion towards marginalized groups.